Okay, so we shall be commencing in a minute.
Yes, you will have to make me host so that I can divide it into the breakout room things.
I'm trying to make you host right now.
Okay, brilliant.
Voila.
Done.
Over to you.
Hello, everyone. Alice, did you want to say anything at the beginning, or can I just start?
Why don't you just start?
Okay. So give me a second to share my screen. Just a minute. Okay, we still have some people. Okay. Can I have some thumbs up if you can see my screen, my slides? Or a nod from someone that I can see?
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay.
Yes, can see you.
Okay, good. Hopefully not just me, but also the screen, simply because I'm navigating two screens, so it's a little bit tricky. So if you can see that first engaging community language learners slide, we are fine. Okay, hopefully, Alice, you can admit remaining people, participants in.
Yes.
So first of all, hello everyone. It's really lovely to meet you all, and it is a real pleasure to be here tonight and to have the privilege to conclude this series of workshops. I'll do my best to provide you with equally interesting and valuable information that will help you in your future teaching endeavours, just like our colleagues in the previous 6 weeks did. And before I introduce ourselves, and I say ourselves, as two of us actually prepared tonight's session, my dear colleague, Dr. Hui Ling Xu and myself. And, but before we start, let us go through some workshop rules, even though Alex mentioned some of them already, and some housekeeping. Hui Ling sends her apologies, but she was not feeling very well earlier today, so she couldn't join us tonight. So, as you already know, please mute your microphones, and you can also turn off your cameras while listening, especially if you don't want to be seen in the recording. Now, something new, I haven't seen it in this period. Somebody's mic is on, so please turn off your mics. So if you can go, just a little activity. So if you can go to your own video panel, there where you see your own picture, and I'm going to try that too. And there should be, you should see mute in blue, and then 3 little dots. If you click on those 3 little dots, you should be able to choose rename. And try to and I would like you to rename yourselves so that you have your first name on and your preferred first or language that you teach. So you can see my example. So now it says Jasna, Croatian, because I teach Croatian. Okay, that way we can see straight away how many languages are actually represented here tonight. Those of you joining from the phone, you might have done it, you would have to, the process is a bit different. You have to go through participants and then rename, but if you can't do it, it doesn't matter. This was just, I think it would be interesting to see which languages we have. So 3 little dots in your video panel, and you can rename yourself as we go on. Okay, next, so this was what I wanted to say. So next, if you can in chat, if you can pop in and greet everyone in your own language, or your first language, or the language that you teach, or it can be even your favorite language. When it comes to Hui Ling and I, we would say, hopefully I pronounced that well, or Dobra večer svima in Croatian, that's much easier for me. Okay, just want to have a look at the chat, but I can't see it for some reason. Oh yes, it's coming. Oh, beautiful. Konnichiwa, dobry večer. Some I can, dobry Yeah, like comments before, hey, okay, there must be either Swedish. Eva Gabrielsson, I know her. Hey, Eva. Snježana Serbian, dobro večer, similar to Croatian. Some that I can't, I know Kalimera, Kalispera, but don't know which one it was. Anyway, so you see how many languages good. We've maybe learned how to say good evening in different languages. Next reminder, as you will know, that this session, including chat, is recorded, and that recording will be uploaded to YouTube afterwards to be available to everyone who couldn't join us tonight. Chat will not be shared, and neither will, but what happens in breakout rooms will not be recorded and therefore also not shared. Some responses, though, in the Padlet may be used anonymously in a resource package. Okay. If you have a question, I really don't mind if you raise your hand. I'll ask Alice to keep an eye on that and ask a question as we go. Or probably easier if you just write your question in the chat. If you decide to speak to me, to us, or when in breakout rooms, please unmute yourself. And it's recommended that you also turn on your camera so that you can see each other. Hopefully we've covered all, and we can start our discussion about motivation in language classroom. Before that, a quick introduction. Because most of you actually don't know us. Okay, so both Hui Ling and I come from Languages and Cultures, discipline within Faculty of Arts, and we both teach languages, Hui Ling Chinese and I teach Croatian. Even though those two languages are pretty different, we two actually share many professional interests and have a very similar professional background. We both, just like you all, teach community languages actually, and the only difference being that we teach adults or young learners and you teach younger students. We are both linguists with strong interest in heritage languages and home language maintenance. We both have worked within TESOL area before, and we both really care about the teaching process. In other words, what happens in the classroom and what can be done in order to create pathways that would lead towards successful language learning. I believe this is at least one thing that we also share with you. I have to say I'm rather new to Australia. I've been here for barely 6 years, but during that time, I believe I've learned quite a lot about community language programs in Australia and in New South Wales, mainly through my engagement with my Croatian colleagues, some of whom might be here with us tonight. On screen, you could have seen our more kind of professional bios. I was telling you a slightly different story. Okay, so what's the plan for tonight? Tonight we'll be focusing on motivation, in particular motivation in the second language classroom. Participating in previous workshops, I was thinking, oh, maybe it would be better if motivation was the first one, but it just happens so that it's actually the last one. But actually, a topic called motivation in classroom maybe serves as also as a good summary at the very end of this series. You've probably noticed yourself that motivation to learn a language, to be in the first place in a language classroom, will have a huge impact on how our students behave and what they achieve. So we will try to define motivation, look into the role of motivation in language learning in more depth. We will look into some motivational models relevant for what we do as language teachers. And lastly, we will try to come up with some ideas together how to increase motivation among our young learners. We will use chat as you've seen it before. We will work in breakout rooms, you're already used to that. And you will need to access 2 Padlets during the session in order to complete the activities. Okay, so I don't know about you, but most likely we all have similar experiences. But at the beginning of every school year or every academic year, in my case, I look at my enrollment lists and I think, how will this year go? What are the new students like? Will they be motivated? Will they like me? Will they like how I teach or what I teach? Will they learn? Will they be happy about the outcomes? You've probably asked yourselves such or similar questions many times. Maybe even you question what you do and how you do it every time you're about to enter the classroom. Answers to these questions will be impacted by numerous factors, one of which is definitely motivation of our students to be in the class on a particular day, in a particular semester, or in a particular year. So first of all, the motivation to be in the classroom in the first place, and then motivation to learn and to do activities and so on. Or just kind of move focus from languages to anything else we do in life. So for example, looking at ourselves, some days we do feel motivated to exercise, the others we would rather just sit on a sofa. Sometimes we feel motivated to learn how to cook, for example, or some other new skill. Some days we can't be bothered. So our goal today is to explore what motivation is and why is it so important in the language classrooms. To start with, motivation is a key to whatever we do, whether we feel like doing anything or nothing, and is crucial for setting and fulfilling our goals. Motivation will determine how students behave and feel in the classroom. In short, we can say that motivation is the reason for people's actions, willingness, and goals. We can also say that motivation is a desire to act in service of a goal, crucial element in setting and attaining one's objectives. And motivation is also one of the key factors in language learning. We also know for a fact that people can influence their own levels of motivation and self-control. Therefore, understanding motivation can help us understand our students and their behavior, and also to understand ourselves, of course. Motivation falls under the broad domain of second language acquisition, and more specifically, under what it's called individual differences. So what impacts students when it comes to motivation will be in those individual differences. Not all students or the whole group of students will behave in the same manner in that regard. We know very well that learners differ based on how successfully they adapt to and benefit from instructions and various factors that play a role in that process. Okay, those of you who participated in or watched John Hadjick's masterclass recently, which is available on Federation's YouTube channel still, might remember that John showed you a list of factors that could impact student achievement and learning. And I have it here. So I know it's tiny, you can't really see what's happening here, but it's not important. So without going into any details here and analyzing specific elements of this slide, I just want you to have a look at how many factors there are. So here in this particular slide, 256. Everything that is marked with a blue or green dot will impact more or less, but it will have a more significant role in student achievement. So there is obviously a lot to take into account. A lot can determine how well our students do in a class. But we tend to believe, applied linguists, we tend to believe that actually motivation is one of the key factors. If you can have the best classroom, the best equipment in the classroom, you can be the best teacher there is on the planet Earth, but if your student is not motivated to learn, learning will not happen. Okay, before we go any deeper in some of those individual differences, let me ask you a question, and I would like you to answer in a chat. So what, in your opinion, impacts your students' language learning, either negatively or positively? So what impacts your students' language learning? Okay, I see that there were like some discussions about the similarities of languages. But if I can have maybe some answers now, what impacts your student language learning from your experience? Family and friends, the everyday parents speaking in English. Oh, motivation, that's probably in a negative way, I assume. Environment, that's very broad. Maybe we can elaborate later. Teacher, motivation. Don't know whether that's for me. Why? Yes, is there a question?
Yeah, I wanted to say like traditions and culture.
Like in a positive way, you mean?
Yeah.
So they would be more motivated if you include that, or if they're participating outside the class, also in maybe folklore or sports or something. Interaction, says someone. Okay. Some of them want to speak to relatives, of course, community. Okay. So you can keep going. It will be good to have a look later what your opinions are, what impacts your students' learning most. This is kind of a summary of it. So some of the individual learner variables that researchers have looked into include, for example, age, because also whether they're 5 or 7 or 10 or whether they're 25 will have a difference, will make a difference as well. Aptitude, that is the innate or natural ability in our case to learn a language. Learning strategies, learning styles, learning contexts, and affective factors. And this is where motivation falls in, such as attitude and motivation, but we're going to focus on motivation today. So motivation is just one of many variables, but one that can be directly impacted in either direction. So like I said, either in a positive direction or negative direction. As a learner variable, motivation has long attracted a great deal of research attention from the perspectives of social psychology mainly and education, because it is universally accepted that motivation plays a vital role in academic learning in general. And this is particularly true of the process of mastering a second language. So we will discuss, or I will lead you through two main theories that kind of take into account the role of motivation in language learning classrooms. And those theories are very kind of important in applied linguistics in researching second language acquisition and learning. Among the theories that had profound influence of researching motivation in the L2, so second language context, was one developed by Robert Gardner. Gardner believed that there are two primary individual differences relevant for learning and succeeding in acquiring a second language. One is ability and the other one is motivation. In other words, he believed that successful language learning could not be attributed only to ability. He realized early in his career that, for example, someone will not be able to learn a language of a community that one doesn't like. So you have to like people, or you have to like the community in order to be motivated enough, be able to learn the language. What does this mean in an average classroom? In plain words, it means that a student with higher levels of ability, intelligence and learning aptitude, for example, will tend to be more successful in learning the language. Also, students with higher levels of motivation will tend to do better than those showing less motivation. Of course, conclusion here is very clear. If we have students of very high ability and high motivation, that's our ideal student, right? They will achieve a lot. However, we can also have a highly talented and capable students, but unless they have positive attitudes towards the community, towards the language, towards the teacher, peers in the classroom, the learning outcome of such students may be unsatisfactory or not as good as we would expect it. Or we might have a student who otherwise shows average ability, but is highly motivated to speak, I don't know, Arabic, Chinese, Macedonian, Serbian, or whichever language to their grandparents, or which is motivated to learn, for example, more about their soccer player or actor. That student actually might outperform the first one, as their motivation enhances their other learning abilities and compensates for them in a certain way. Formal contexts, and under formal contexts we actually think of, for example, learning at school, learning in a classroom, will generally require more ability, while the informal contexts, such as engaging in a conversation, listening to the radio, or learning lyrics of a favorite song, will require more motivation. So learning outside the class will require more motivation, but both require actually both for successful learning. As we'll see later, and we will talk about it, but I want to mention it here as well, simply to give you the whole picture. In his later work, Gardner actually added the third dimension to this model, and that is effort. So not even ability and motivation on their own are enough. That we also have to put in some effort into what we are doing in order to achieve results when it comes to language learning. So this is one of the early models that Gardner kind of constructed in 1979. So he came up with this educational model. It contains 4 main parts that are all relevant in a language learning context. So what are these 4 elements or 4 constituents? First is social milieu. Later, he changed the name of this category to external factors. This refers to individual cultural beliefs or environment, and somebody mentioned in the chat environment influences then. Also environment that influence both affective and cognitive individual differences. Social milieu is particularly important actually in the case of heritage languages, second languages like in our here Australian context, and home environment, as this is where our students actually develop their attitudes and that first motivation for learning their heritage language. If the attitudes at home are positive, they will be more motivated to learn. If they are not, of course, the results will be average or not satisfactory. Second element in this model are individual differences. And they involve intelligence, so that natural ability, language aptitude, both verbal and cognitive abilities, motivation, and situational anxiety. That means that we can, for example, and you probably noticed this with your students, some students simply have a fear of using that second language for whatever reason, whether they were mocked or because simply they're perfectionists, and unless they utter whatever they want to utter, say it perfectly, they're not going to do it. The third element in the model is the setting, so learning context, the atmosphere in the classroom, for example, or how they actually get along with the peers. And the fourth one involves outcomes, so linguistic knowledge and language skills that will be gained at the end of the process, or there will be also non-linguistic skills, such as attitudes, values, or intercultural skills. We know that language learning does not just, as a result, give us knowledge of a particular language, but also we develop a whole set of intercultural skills. We understand other cultures better, or that particular culture better. We can communicate with members of that community in a more appropriate manner, and so on. Okay, as I said a bit earlier, in 1985, so those models changed, and Gardner, in his later models, he added components to his motivational system, some of which might be relevant to our students. And one of those is integrativeness, which refers to person's openness to the target language group. So that's, again, that acceptance or how much a student likes the community that speaks a particular language. Specifically, it accounts to the extent to which the learner is interested in foreign languages, as well as his or her present attitudes towards the community where the L2 is spoken. It also accounts for the social and cultural reasons why the individual actually learns particular language. Second element here are the attitudes towards the learning situation. This element accounts for the educational context of language acquisition, second language acquisition. It involves, for example, attitude towards the school, towards the teacher, towards the course, and this determines how much the educational context actually helps in improving second language performance. Motivation, as the third element, is here further developed and it has kind of subcategories. Is represented as a complex of variables. So motivation is not a single category, it's a very complex category that has numerous layers or sub-elements. Specifically, it is the combination of three main components. So, and this is the effort that we mentioned earlier. So effort, desire to achieve a goal of learning the language. So effort, desire, and attitudes again towards the learning situation. You see also how important attitudes towards the particular language are in learning, in creating motivation for learning a particular language. Motivation is seen as referring to the extent to which the individual strives to learn the language because of a desire to do so and the enjoyment experienced in the learning activity. So we have all these elements in this definition. So Gardner and other researchers argue that while people may have the desire, for example, to achieve a goal, without actual action or effort, the learning may not be sustained to a satisfactory level or not at all, and the goal might not be achieved. What does that mean in plain words? That means that, for example, your goal is to lose weight. So you sign up for gym, you join the gym, and you go to the gym. But unless you really actually do some exercise while at the gym, no weight loss is going to happen. So that means that there has to be some effort involved as well. Generally speaking, and you've probably heard that before, because usually these terms are also known as integrative motivation and instrumental orientation, but motivation, but Gardner uses the term orientations. There are two major reasons why a person would choose to learn a language in the first place. So Gardner's integrative orientations refer to reasons for learning a second language that emphasize the interest in the target language, community, and culture. This orientation is a result of person's need to identify with the community. In other words, the learner is pursuing a second language for social and cultural purposes, to speak to family or to be a part of, for example, a folkloric group or a sports club. If it comes to, but thinking here more social context, instrumental orientations refer to conditions where the language is being studied for practical purposes. That is, for example, for functional benefits, that could be, for example, using it to get a good job or to obtain credits at the university or good grades at school, or simply to use the language to be able to speak that language when traveling. Okay, I think you've listened to me a lot. So what I propose here is that we stop, take a breath, and that we do our first activity. But don't go into breakout rooms until I explain what we're gonna do. So first of all, I would kindly ask Alice to share the link. You can see the link here, but you can't click it, right? So we need the link in the chat if possible. Those of you who are on the phones, you might just want to scan, or who have phones handy, you might just scan this, this code. And then this is what I would like you to do. So once you're in your group, as a group, choose one of the scenarios that you will see in the Padlet. So there are three different scenarios. I'm just hoping that they will, if you see that a lot of groups are choosing number one, for example, go please for 2 or 3, so that we have answers in each section. Discuss your options, and your question is, what could you do to motivate that particular learner, student 1, student 2, student 3 in the examples, and help them learn better and faster. What I would like you to do, I would like to add a little bit to this. I would like you, those of you who participated in previous workshops, if you could apply the knowledge that you gained through those workshops, if you can think of tasks that you were shown, or if you can use any of the ideas you've gained through those workshops, that will be great. So that will be then a proper kind of summary of the 7-week process that we had here. I would like you to write your answers, of course, in the Padlet, but this time is a little bit different. I noticed previously you could randomly choose where in Padlet your group is going to write, but this time, because you're choosing a scenarios, if you could please click on a plus underneath the scenario that you've picked, that would be great. So I've listed like previous workshops to refresh your memory, what was told there. But again, if that's your first time you're joining us, or it was still too long ago that you listened to a particular workshop, don't worry, you can simply go with what you know and what you and speak from your experience. Okay, I think we are ready to go into breakout rooms now, and I think we can afford 10 minutes before we come back. We're mainly back. I'm gonna continue. Hopefully that's okay with you guys. Before I answer anything or reflect on what I've heard in a breakout room where I was involved, I would like you to, we're not gonna just end here. So if that's okay with you, there is a part B to this activity. So if you still have those Padlets open, or those of you who do, if you can look now as the main group, not in groups anymore, have a look at other people's responses. And there's not much time, so at least look at the responses in the group, in the scenario that you chose to address. If you have time, if you feel like it, you can add a comment, or if you find a particular one that you like, that you think provides a really good answer, maybe you can just click that little heart and like those solutions or those responses. I've been myself answering or commenting some of those entries. I didn't have time to read them all, but I will now share them here on screen so we can have a look. So first of all, the three, so while you're looking and reading, if you can with half a ear listen to me as well. So 3 scenarios, I believe that you've probably recognized, or kind of you could match some of your students with these scenarios. Okay, these were kind of pretty stereotypical, but I really believe that you see a little bit of everything in the classroom. Like I said, ideal student has high ability and is highly motivated. And I remember one of the previous sessions, could be the first one, when you were asked about what are your students like, and I remember that lots of you actually said motivated, which is great. If they are motivated, then even if your classroom is not the nicest classroom in Sydney, or even if you don't have the most modern technology to deliver your class, if your students are motivated, they're not going to care. They're still going to be happy to be there and to learn. So motivation is really a key answer to learning a language. If they feel comfortable in classroom, it's not gonna matter for them if they're in a classroom or if they're sitting outside on a grass area and so on. So there were some really good ones. So if you can spend some time and read and comment and reflect on well, generally the answers were very generic, very general, and the idea here is to be as specific as possible, but I understand you have very limited time. There was an interesting question that was asked in the breakout room where I participated in, and that was like, well, we can't really do that because we have 30 other students in a class, and that's a very legitimate comment. That's same for me. My class is sometimes smaller, sometimes bigger, yours as well. We can't do this for every individual learner. We will have clusters, a group of students that behave similarly. So, and then sometimes with some activities, maybe we will have the option to customize and maybe help students who are maybe less motivated, and then they don't want to speak, for example, about weather or, I don't know, national costumes, but they love sports. So maybe we can then ask them to describe the jersey, the kind of national jersey of the sports team that they go for, and so on. So of course we're not going to have time for everything and everyone individually, but like I said, keep in mind that individual differences the motivation falls under those individual differences. Okay, going back to the slides, again, hopefully, can I have a nod or hands up if you see my slides? Hopefully you do. Does that mean yes? Okay, let me check the chat. Yes, okay, thank you for that. Sorry, again, juggling two screens, it's not easy to see what's going on your side. So Gardner's theory had a huge influence on how we see the learning process and learners, that ability, motivation, effort thing, model. This work was somehow criticized later, mostly because his observations were made mainly in the Canadian bilingual context and needed to be a little bit more elaborated for some other contexts, or some elements were missing when discussed in other contexts. Also, initially, Gardner did not emphasize some of the features of the motivation as much as others believed that it was necessary. So, for example, new theories on motivation in the second language setting, which all built up on Gardner's work, emphasize the dynamic character of motivation. So, motivation is not something that is static. New theories on motivation in L2 setting, which all built upon Gardner's work, emphasize that dynamic character of motivation. These models explore the short-term and long-term changes in the individual differences as they learn their individuals' differences as they learn their heritage of the second language. Motivation as a dynamic factor fluctuates even within a class period. So you might have a student who comes highly motivated at the beginning of the class, but by the end of the class might be tired and simply not motivated to learn anymore. Or it fluctuates within a year and definitely within a lifetime. So for example, when I ask my students about their childhood, whether they attended community school or whether Croatian was spoken at home, many say that as kids, they were not
Sorry, Mama.
Mics off, please. So the kids were not interested. So many would say that as kids, they were not interested in learning the language, and that all they wanted at the time was to play soccer with the mates, because that's what other Aussies were doing on a Saturday, but they had to go to Croatian school and they hated it. However, it's as grown-ups that they realize, or as young adults, that the importance of mastering the heritage language, and then they decide to learn, and then they achieve great results within a couple of years. So one of those more contemporary models is Dörnyei's learning model, which builds on motivational self-system of L2 learning. It's a little bit abstract, but bear with me if you can. This motivational self-system has three components: the ideal L2 self, ought to L2 self, and L2 learning experience. The ideal L2 self is actually a person's imagined ideal future self as a second language learner. This ideal L2 self promotes motivation by inspiring the present self to strive to become the ideal self. In other words, it is how we imagine we will once be once we learn the language. The L2 self includes all the attributions a person believes that they should have in order to meet the expectations or to avoid negative outcomes. And this is associated with extrinsic motivational orientation. That can be, for example, a sense of duty towards parents, or sense of duty towards teachers, or simply the need not to disappoint teachers or parents. The L2 learning experience component, we've seen that one before. in different models includes actually the situational and environmental aspects of the language learning process, as well as one's subjective learning experience. Okay, so based on these premises, which are kind of somehow incorporated in his learning model, Dörnyei came up with this learning model that you can see on the screen, which also involves 3 components. And this is, I think, this model is very important for us as teachers, as it clearly kind of states what are the areas that have the greatest impact on motivation of our students. The most general level, this one here, of the construct is the language level. The focus is on orientations and motives related to various aspects of second language, or L2, such as culture it conveys, the community in which it is spoken, and the potential usefulness of proficiency in it. These general motives determine basic learning goals and explain language choice. So for example, why, for example, we choose to learn language A and not language B. This general dimension can be described by 2 broad motivational subsystems. So these are the 2 subsystems here. The first one is integrative motivational subsystem. You probably remember that we had something similar with the integrative orientation and instrumental orientation with Gardner. So this is very similar. This is centered around the person's affective predispositions to learn a second language. And this includes social, cultural, and linguistic components, as well as how much is the person in general interested in foreign cultures and languages. The second element here is instrumental motivational subsystem. Again, we recognize it from before. Consists of extrinsic motives centered around the individual's future career and endeavors. In other words, what good can learning a language bring? What benefits? How can it help me, for example, to get a better job or to gain a better education? The learner element of the model involves need for achievement. So the need for achievement is a great motivator. If they want to achieve or gain a better grade for whatever reason, that will motivate them to learn better and will kind of drive them towards the goal. Second one being self-confidence, which actually includes 4 sub-components, and I'll just list them here. You don't have them on the screen, but they would be language use anxiety. So how much of that fear do they feel the student feels when they speak a language, some or none? Do they feel anxious when needing to speak their second language in a particular situation, or all the time maybe? So language use anxiety. Second one is perceived L2 competence, which means how does a student perceive their competence? Do they compare themselves, for example, to the others, and does that help them in the path to learn the language, or does that actually discourage them? Another element to it is self-efficacy, which refers to a person's belief in his or her ability to succeed in a particular situation. So similar to the previous element, that is perceived L2 competence, but now not in general, more like with a focus on a particular task, for example. And last element of self-confidence would be causal attributions, which is kind of a fancy name for something actually that we can say, who does student blame, for example, for potential failure? For example, do they blame outside factors such as the teacher is awful and I can't learn from that teacher? Or for example, difficult language, that language is impossible to be learned, so why bother? Or do they take responsibility and blame themselves and their lack of effort, for example, which is easily fixed next time they try? Because, okay, last time I didn't put enough effort. If I put more effort, I will achieve better results. The third main element of the model, and you see all those elements have great impact on foreign language learning motivation. Here we don't make a difference between foreign actually and second language. Here we kind of the topic that we discussed today, it's the same in all contexts. So the third one is learning situation. Again, it's made of intrinsic and extrinsic motives and motivational conditions, and can be split into 3 areas. course specific, so what the structure of the course is that will impact the motivation, what content is actually taught, or it can be teacher specific, what's the teaching style that's applied, what's teacher's personality like, because not every teacher, well, not every student will like every teacher, and the last one being group specific, and that is peer influence, which is also important. In other words, how one feels in a particular group. The group can also impact how a particular student learns. You can have a highly motivated student who ends up in a kind of noisy class, who generally would rather play sports than learn a language, and that student after a while will either give up or be not happy and will seek other ways to engage with the language. Again, I'm going to keep in mind this, but I'm going to stop here and stop listing possible factors that actually influence motivation in our learners. Like I said earlier, there are obviously so many factors that we can't take them all into account, and on some we as teachers have some influence, and on some of the factors we have none or just a little bit of influence. Hopefully this overview of those that we mentioned so far can help you reflect on why students, for example, behave the way they do, and maybe that all gives you ideas how you can stimulate them if you keep in mind that kind of model that has 3 major areas that impact motivation of our students. With this in mind, let's do the second activity. And again, don't go into breakout rooms until we address the rules. There was a little bit of confusion with the first one, sorry for that. So there is another Padlet address that you need this time. So this is the address that you'll need this time, or code. And what I would like to say, again, a little bit different. So you will find these, sorry, how many? 3, 4, 5, 6 statements, each in a different column in a Padlet. And as groups, I would ask you to give comments on as many as you can. So again, you won't have one little window, but you will add in window under specific statements. And the statements, I'm going to read them later, but they were taken from the TESOL International Association website that have Motivating Language Learners to Succeed article on there. And these are their recommendations. So they say, what should you do to motivate your language learners to succeed? Create friendly atmosphere in the classroom. Personalize classroom environment. Enable sense of accomplishment. Help students set their own short-term goals and long-term as well. Use pair or group activities to develop students' confidence. Connect language learning to students' interests outside of the class. However, when you look at them, they're very generic, they're very general, and you've probably, if I asked you, you would probably come up with that easily, and we had similar comments in a previous Padlet activity. But I would like you to try to be as specific as you can. How would you create friendly atmosphere in the classroom? How would you personalize classroom environment? How would you enable sense of accomplishment? You can have one of those particular previous scenarios in mind, or just go generally what you do in your classroom. I will challenge you with another thing here, and that is those of you, I know that some of you were not able to actually return to on-site learning after the lockdown, and some of you are still teaching online. So how would you apply all these in your Google Classroom? Or if you are one of the fortunate ones that are doing Zoom meetings with your students, how would you apply, or what would you do in that environment that is completely different than being in a classroom? Also, I know it's challenging because some of you are actually borrowing the classrooms. So you have classrooms where you are not allowed to put anything on the walls, where you can't use anything that is already there. So there are a lot of challenges in front of you. So if you can be as specific as possible, this is the aim of the activity. So take these recommendations and now be more specific, give ideas how to achieve each of these ones, or as many as you can address. I just would like to, okay, maybe we can go into breakout rooms now and maybe spend like 6-7 minutes in them because we are running out of time. Room, Alex, I think that's a good sign for you to start recording again.
All good, ready to go.
So again, if I can have someone to tell me in chat if you see the same Padlet that you were looking at right now, says Emanuela Moreto. Thank you. Yes, and like Alice just mentioned, some good points in the Padlet. I agree. I've been reading as much as I could. But let me just, before I address some of these, let me just tell one thing. There was a question during the break about whether Dörnyei's actually model is applicable to all students and to all ages. Absolutely, it is. And even learning doesn't have to happen in a classroom setting. It's still applicable. When you look at it, there will be always like because a learning setting can also be you learning on your own, using an app or Duolingo or whatever. That will be your learning setting, right? Your learner, and you will your individual differences or characteristics will play a part in how you learn, how fast, and what kind of. It's just that you then govern yourself. You have no one else to take into account. At all. So, and so teacher is maybe then your app or your internet and not a real person, but still all of the elements are still there. Okay, so, and we will address this in a summary as well. So yeah, so if you can see the answers, there were some really good, and I can tell, like just looking at the amount of answers, they obviously struggled with some more than the others. So it was much easier, for example, just looking at the numbers of answers to provide or to give ideas how you would create friendly atmospheres. For example, encouraging students to say how their day has been or introduce themselves. You can't do introducing every time, but you can do it at the beginning, for example, if there is a new learner coming to a class, work as a team, as a family, great. And a lot of those classes, actually community language classes, you do create, just like, for example, I do with my students, we become a little community. So it's not just a teacher, students, you learn about them, about their families. So it's a very kind of intimate surrounding, and that can create a lot of positive atmosphere for them to feel comfortable, and I'll address that later. But with some, you had a little bit more maybe issues, or we didn't get so many answers. But again, as I go on, if you'd like to spend some more time on this Padlet and like some comments, you can do that. That would be good maybe for others to see your feedback. And I will move on and slowly starting to wrap up. We could speak about motivation for days. Motivation is a very complex, it's a very complex idea, should I say. It has lots of layers, as you've seen, and lots of things from the environment and our individual differences can impact our motivation. So to wrap up, we've tried to put together some ideas and recommendations from our side, how to increase motivation of your and our students. As teachers, we will, like I said before, we will have more influence on some elements of the models and less on some others. But we believe that we as teachers will mostly have influence. We can mainly, in a best way, influence the learning situation. That means we can influence syllabus, we can influence coursework, we can influence activities, because we choose what we're going to do in the classroom and how we're going to teach. So therefore, that situation is also put here in the Dörnyei's model. It was in our picture, it was actually the number 3. So first of all, it's good to be reminded that you can't influence all the factors that are influencing our students and their motivation. You've seen how many there are. And some of them come with their genes, and you can't change that. You've seen how many, but what you can do is actually, you can try to avoid boredom in the classroom. Boredom has a huge negative impact on students' motivation. So another thing that we can do, we can try to keep our instructions clear and adjust it to the proficiency level of our students. One of the important elements in teaching is to have that right level that we choose to teach, especially when it comes to language. If you, for example, speak the target language in your class, but if you're using sentences that are too complex, vocabulary that is that your students might not know, and if there's too much of that, they will eventually switch off. They'll try to listen to you and they will switch off. And of course, the boredom takes place and they're not going to be learning. Also, if it's too easy for them, same will happen. They're not motivated to learn. So you have to find the right level. That's in applied linguistics, that's called input +1. So you have to be in a right level where they understand, they know majority of what's being taught, but you have that one certain percentage of new elements, of new content that you want them to learn. And then that's the right level, and then they feel like they have the confidence that they can master that. We can also make the syllabus relevant, and we've heard about that many times throughout this series of workshops. And we can do this by doing numerous different activities, or for example, we can also include our students in creating it. You'll find this in a second section actually. Or looking back at the previous workshops, we can teach pragmatics, how to use language in a particular situation, or we can use translanguaging. So these are some of the great approaches that would make syllabus or what would content relevant. When it comes to students, we can help them in certain way, not as much as we can influence learning situation. We can help them set and achieve short and long-term goals. We can make them search, for example, for answers rather than providing them. And we can let them explore and do research on their own or in the groups. We can definitely work on their self-confidence and self-efficacy, how they see themselves as language learners. Somebody said, or many of you said in Padlet, we can give compliments. That's right. So the classroom should be, first of all, a safe place in which students can feel comfortable rather than intimidated. I usually say to my students, and they actually, I mean, they're university students, they really care about the grades they get at the end. I usually tell them, like, this is your platform to test your language, and you are here to practice. Use this space to make mistakes, because that's how you learn. You learn through, and then they feel safer. Okay, some more, some less. But at least they don't feel threatened or intimidated to use language in the classroom as much. And the last one is the language level. And you probably remember that this was kind of the most general level that implies various aspects of second language. And it includes community, where it's spoken, and attitudes towards the community. We can at least, we can't really influence that element as much. But here, our allies are actually the parents or the whole families where possible. So we might want them to keep them close and keep them engaged where possible. We can also, to help with attitudes and so on, we can also kind of include socio-cultural component into our class, for example, film, music, or invite some guests where possible. And because that can, at the same time, they can also help to make learning meaningful and relevant. And last but not least, please remember that not every activity and every approach will be ideal for every learner or every group of learners, or not even for every occasion. So coming closer to an end, I want to say one thing. I think you're all doing an amazing job, and the idea here wasn't to kind of make you feel that there's so much more that you need to do. And I guess you know your students best, and you will always be the best person to decide what works in your classroom. But hopefully we've given you some ideas how you can improve. I think changing the methodology and how you teach also helps us and keeps us motivating, and we also kind of feel more accomplished as teachers if we if we try to do new things in the classroom. And if you are motivated, your students have a better chance of being motivated as well. Okay, so to totally wrap up, 2 more things. If you would like to keep in touch with us, so both Hui Ling and myself, we come from Department of Media Communications, Creative Arts, Language and Literature, new big long name, from in particular discipline of languages and cultures. And these are email addresses, so feel free, and Hui Ling actually said be free to email her if you'd like. And here you can see actually a photo of the corridor in our brand new building with the languages and cultures at Macquarie University. And we put some references for you here, including Robin's and Hui Ling's latest book that they wrote together that can give you some ideas about how to increase motivation in the classroom. And I would like to use this opportunity to finish with a quote that I really like. And even though we did not discuss culture so much in this workshop, but I think it's relevant to everything you've heard in the series. And that is, so let me read the quote first. So, if culture was a house, then language was the key to the front door to all the rooms inside. So you as community or heritage language teachers, you are helping your students unlock these cultural doors, and we'd like to thank you for that and for all of your hard work. And I would also like to thank you for joining us tonight. If there are any questions, I guess Alex might want to end recording, and you can be